Hey, hi everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Rahul.
This is Karthik. So connecting from Rahul's account. Just give it one more minute for people to join, then we'll start in a minute. All right. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay. So just a quick recap. So like whatever we saw yesterday is the basics of client server architecture, right? What is a server, and it is just a computer sitting in the remote, and it has some LAN connections. How it is connected to DB internally. If a particular computer communicates with the other servers, when an event happens, we call that as a webhook, and the data can be coming from a webhook to the client from our server. Data can be coming through databases, and data can be coming through caching mechanisms like a CDN. Okay. And we also saw like what are those configurations, like how a server can be configured depending upon what kind of machine you opt for in the cloud, and HTTP, HTTPS, right? And we also saw what basics of what is a NoSQL database, and what are its different types and all, right? And we saw the basics of API calls, right? What are the components of an API, request methods, what are its elements, and what are different types of HTTP methods, get, post, put, delete, patch. We saw what are the basic examples, right? So coming back to the original question, what exactly is an API? We saw what are the how basics of how an API functions in the background, but we also wanted to know what exactly is an API. Any answers actually? Because API is a very broad and confusing term. People might tend to confuse with different things. We might call different things as an API actually. Yes, yes. One of the exact and almost correct answers, exact answers. Service that can be consumed by an application. Yes, that is right. So service consumed by an app, right? So what is a service then? So service is like, see, I'm creating an application, and I am providing some code and exposing this code, certain set of codes through some mechanism, so that people can give input to the codes and get the required output, right? What else can be called as an API? Let's say I have this how many of you have worked in Selenium? There's an library called Apache POA. To read or write data from the Excel, right? This is a set of library which is compressed in a jar format and is given to us, Java archive format. We call this also as a kind of an API. Why? This is also a kind of an API because it is a kind of library which can be which is compressed and given to us as an API, or given to us as a set of libraries. What this library does internally, it has a set of codes to read and write your Excel, right? But whereas our job is to what, make use of the classes given by the particular the particular Apache POA library to read and write Excel. we are just making use of the methods and classes given by that library, and we are not going to write any extra code for the functionality to work. So this is a service, right? This is a service that is provided by Apache open source client, so that we can do some functionality. What is the functionality in this case? It is reading or writing an Excel, right? Now, here comes that important part. So what's an API? It's actually, API is a set of service actually consumed by an application. When I say service, it is a piece of code actually written by some developers for an application, so that they will be providing these access channels. What are these access channels? As a particular classes or methods through which we can access those particular set of codes or methods or libraries, so that we can do one particular operation. So in this case, it's a reading of an Excel. Let's take an example of web application. In context of web application, what is an API? What is a web application actually? Not a URL. URL is a component of an HTTP request. Don't confuse with that with an API actually, right? We'll come to that part in today's session, and we'll also see a quick demo, like how we can do these things in Java REST Assured library. Maybe we'll do a quick demo. The same thing that we do in browser, Postman, and all those things. URL is not an API. Understand that. URL is a component of an HTTP request, right? So what are the components we saw? URI, endpoint, combinedly everything we call as an URL, right? And the protocol, what's an HTTP, HTTPS, query params, request body, headers, and any auth mechanism. The header. These are the components of an API, not an API itself, or components of an. Let's say instead of putting as an API, we can say HTTP method. I think this is the right term, maybe. So, see, when I say I'm hitting a get method, maybe we'll go to the same request example as yesterday. I'm hitting this particular URL, and we are seeing this JSON response, right? So where this data is coming from? It's the first question. Anyone has the answer? I'm seeing some JSON data here, but the important part being where this data is actually coming from. Okay, might be DB is one of the answer. But what I'm trying to ask is, like, see, the data in the DB might not be in the same format that we see here, right? So who is, yes, it's coming from the app server. App server in turn like communicates with the DB and get this data for us. But again, this format, this JSON format is given by the app server, right? So there is an app server for GET request. It's an intermediary app server running in the background or in the remote machine, right? So first thing we need to understand, once you hit an API, every app server will have an class. In case of Java, we call it a class, or a general term for that is a controller layer. So the controller layer is an entry point of any request that you are sending from the browser, right? Very important to understand. I'll probably show this demo of a controller layer if we get time in the today's class itself. Actually, how to write a server itself if time permits, right? This controller layer will have two important things that it will have a look of. One is, first important thing what it will have is what type of HTTP method the request is consisting of, whether it's a get method or post method or put method. And another important thing is what this is the first important thing a controller layer will have. Second important thing is what's the endpoint, right? So in this particular case, what's an endpoint? here? What's the endpoint here? It is /API/users, right? Not only API/API/users. This is the endpoint. Right? Users is also an endpoint, right? And this is a query parameter section. So query parameter, it might have, it might not have, but these two things are mandatory. What is an HTTP method? What's an endpoint? Depending upon whether it's a get method or post method, it might or might not have a query parameter. Let's say it's a get method. It might tend to have a query param. Even in get method, query param is optional, not mandatory, right? Now, our request has entered this controller layer. The work of this controller layer is to read what type of HTTP method is that, what type of endpoint is that, and redirect it to a particular method in a particular class. The redirection happens in certain mechanism. I'll talk about that later. Assume that it will know to which class and method to redirect after passing this HTTP method and endpoint. So that particular method will have a return type, and it will process all these requests, and it will generate a JSON response either from a DB or by on its own, doesn't matter. Generate a JSON response, and you're seeing it back, right? Generates JSON response, and I have to understand the controller only. Controller sends back to browser. It's a response. It's a responsibility of this controller layer to get an input, send this particular thing to a right method in the right class, get the response back from this method, and send back to the browser. It's work of this controller layer. Now, I'm saying controller layer, but what is this controller layer? It's actually a piece of code written in Java. If it's Java, means it's a piece of code written in Java only. It's just a application server which has a piece of code. It's actually code library, right? So why I'm giving this example, because what is an API here? So in this example, we saw one endpoint, one URL with a domain and endpoint and query parameter, and I am saying it's coming to this controller layer. It's going to process all this data, return the data back to the browser. Now, in this context, what is an API? I don't think that it is that much of a complicated answer. Yes, API is a control layer, exactly, right? This controller layer is a piece of code that is going to do all these things that we are asking it to do. So this piece of code, this controller layer has some piece of code, right? That thing is called an API, as simple as that, right? So to put it in a broader perspective, an API is something which is it's a piece of code written in a particular and it's going to run in a particular machine. Upon hitting its service, it's going to process some data and return the data back to us, right? It's a programming interface, right? Interface of what? In this context, interface of the request that is coming from the browser, and in turn the data that it's going to fetch from the database, right? Or someone gave the right answer also, service that can be consumed by the application, right? So application is a browser that we are accessing through it. So what is the service? Service is this controller layer piece of code that is given by this controller. Okay? That is the broader perspective. Okay. Now we need to understand the components of an URL, right? We'll go a little deep into this. Okay. We say the URL will have an URI, this is identifier, and an endpoint. We take this as an example here. Here, what is the endpoint? I'm just giving request.in / this is an optional thing, right? If you give this slash or not, it's an optional here. So in this context, what is an endpoint actually? Here endpoint is easy. I can say slash API slash users is an endpoint. But here, what is the endpoint? If I don't give anything, yes, not the whole URL. The slash is the endpoint. If you give or if you don't give, the slash is the endpoint. We call that as an home route, right? So in an API, what is an home route? If it doesn't have any additional data given in the endpoint, and only slash is there, it is an optional thing. We call that as an home route, right? This home route is responsible for taking us to the home page of this particular website, right? In this case, this is the page, right? So that's the next thing we need to understand. And I was talking about this query param, right? I think I gave what context of what's the query param also. So query param is a kind of an additional query that we are querying to the server. We are asking the server to filter out to the kind of data that we want, right? So here, what is it is trying to filter out here? Can I give page is equal to 1? Will it work? Yes. So page is equal to 2 work. So what is this page? I think anyone used any web application where there's a page kind of thing? Yes. Okay. I will come to understand. We'll come to what's the page later, but understand it's a query parameter. It reads this particular data and it says we have to display the data available in the page 2. So it's a page 2 data, right? If we give 1, it is going to be the page 1 data, right? So it's going to be kind of an additional filter mechanism for us. That's the first thing we need to understand. And coming back to the request headers, what can be the different type of request headers? One famous request header I can think of is application/JSON. Yes. Content type. Yes. So content type is application JSON. That means what? We are giving the request in the form of JSON format only, like that. Right? What are the different formats that you? How many of you have used to Postman here actually? Postman. Just a minute. So there is an HTML or text input as well for the content type, GraphQL input, message input, right? So if you see this, what are the different? PDF is there, XML is there, right? YAML is there, right? gzip is there, audio is there, right? Message multi-part is there. So I wanted to touch upon few important content type here. Application XML, application JSON, we all know, right? XML is going to process the XML data, JSON is going to process the JSON data. So before going into this, see, we all know an API will return an XML or a JSON data, but what are the other data types that API can return? For example, this particular API is returning me JSON data here, right? But I'm hitting this endpoint, it's going to return me the entire web page itself. So what is this return type actually? Return a content type of this particular API. HTML, right? Obviously. So what are the other types of other content types that you, or leave the content type, what are the other types of data that an API can return? Can it return an PDF file? CSV, so obviously, right? Can it return an image? What's the content type for that? It's a multi-part file actually, right? So it's a multi-part. So in the form data, you can even upload the image and all those things, right? So understand that it will be able to process all these data. But what's the problem with loading this entire image from the API response? See, I'm getting this particular. I'm hitting this. I'm hitting this. What's the difference between loading these two websites? Which is faster actually? Obviously, the API response, JSON response is faster, right? Why is this slow? Because there are too many data for it to consume, right? We have this a div with CSS codes and colors and and all those things, table and all those things, embedded links and all those things. Whereas it's a plain and simple text, right? So it all boils down to how much time the API is going to take for your things to get displayed in your particular application, right? So because of that, we don't give everything as an everything in an API response itself, whereas we store this images or PDF kind of thing in an S3 kind of a storage area, and there'll be URL to the storage area, right? We'll give that URL only. For example, you can see that thing here actually, right? Here they are not loading the image itself, they are giving the JSON data. Inside the JSON data, there's an image to the URL. I'm not sure whether this URL will work. Let's check. Okay, it's working, right? So there's an URL to the particular thing. While hitting this URL, that image will be loaded, right? The actual image is not loaded in the API response, whereas the URL to that image will be loaded. And from this, if you hit this URL, the data will be loaded, right? So this is how we have to handle the complicated data in the front end. You don't have to load every data, image and video or PDF kind of data here. It will take so long time to execute. There is always some threshold limit or cutoff time. I'll talk about these things today. So it's always good to give this image and video kind of data, especially in a URL like this, and later make the front end library load the image from this URL. That's the right way to do that, right? So one thing is content type. And what are the other headers that you can think of? Someone was asking like, the headers, what's the use of header? Header is a crucial information containing thing, right? Before even going to the, even URL is a part of a header actually, right? Before even going to the response body, request body at all, it has to process these headers to know what kind of request is that and what kind of content type that we are going to expect. So based on that only, an API can process all these data, right? So headers is a crucial part. I'll also talk about one more important use case of an header. There is, see, I'm hitting an application. I'm hitting an URL. It will first go to a web server and to app server. I was talking about these things yesterday. So I also said this app server is installed in one machine, right? The question comes here: can I have multiple application servers in multiple machines to process? Can I have something like that and connect all these things together? It is possible, yes, right? So there is a server one, or nothing but a computer one, which is having this application one or a application copy one, and there's a server two, will have an app copy two, right? So our request can go to any one of the servers here, even if there are 3-4 servers added, right? Our request can go to any one of the server, and our request will be served from any one of these servers, right? But who is deciding to which server the request should go, right? Who is deciding that? A piece of software or infrastructure is deciding that. We call that as a load balancer, right? Anyone heard of this term called load balancer? Yes. So in a real-time application like Facebook or Amazon, where millions of users are served daily, there is not only one application server. Like what we talked yesterday, there is no single databases machine, right? There are multiple data, thousands of machines connected. Similarly, servers also, there is not one single server. One single server cannot handle millions of users at a time, maybe 500, maybe 1,000, not more than that, right? If you want to accommodate more users here, what you have to do, we have to put more servers horizontally, right, and connect all these things together through this technology called load balancer. What's the beauty of this load balancer? It will check which server is free, and it will redirect the request to the particular server in a round robin fashion in a particular algorithm that it is designed to use for, right? But when I talk about the API request, if it's coming to load balancer will not have an access to your request body. It will have access only to your request header. It will read the what type of request it's, whether it's get request or post request, right? And you can do some crucial things in load balancer itself. For example, it can read the endpoint. It can read what type of request is that. If I say slash API slash users is the endpoint, and it's a get request, even I can design a logic to return the data from a load balancer itself. Every time the data has doesn't want to go to application server, I can write some logic inside load balancer so that I can return the data from the load balancer level itself, right? There are some many use cases for that in real-time application. So headers are very, very important, right? And this type of scaling, you connect multiple computers with multiple application server copy and serving all these things. We call that as an horizontal scaling. It's a very, very important and famous term in tech world, right? Heard of this term? There are two types of scaling, vertical and horizontal. So if you wanted to process more data, either you have to, what's the vertical scaling? Either you have to increase the processing power, increase the RAM and all those things. But there's a limit to it, right? How much processing power can you increase? There's a finite limit to it. Yes. So upgrading your actual hardware is called vertical scaling, whereas you connect a similar kind of hardware horizontally is called horizontal scaling, which is more feasible. Horizontal scaling is more feasible and viable. Right? There are many advantages to it. Right. So that is the thing we need to understand. And what are the other components of an API? There are many components. I just wanted some few important things only. Maybe rest of the things we'll see later in the course. Very, very important next thing is authorization, right? So when we talk about authorization, then comes an important part. What's the difference between, it's a very famous interview question again. Authentication versus authorization. People tend to ask these questions actually, right? So what's the difference between an authentication and authorization? Because a lot of the time even I get confused with all these things. So I'll not say it's a creates token kind of thing. Yes, you can say yes. Authentication validates the credentials, whereas authentication, okay. See, let me put it in a different perspective. Authentication, authorization. Let's say I'm working in a ID firm, right? let's say there is, I'm having this ID card to enter into my IT office, everything is there. So this ID card is an authentication thing for me. So with this ID card, I can enter into my office premises, right? Whereas, do I have every access to every space in that office? Might not be. I might not be having access to a CEO office. I might not be having access to the particular meeting rooms, important meeting rooms, right? So what is an authentication? Authentication says, hey, you are a valid user to use this application. Whereas authorization says, are you the right person to access the right level or not, right? For example, there are many times, I think you may, some people might have also encountered this kind of situations, right? In many applications, there are different roles actually, right? There's an admin role, there's a user role, there's a manager role, right? There are certain endpoints that are restricted to only admin role. Restricted means only admin role can use this, right? And every privilege that admin have, a manager or user might not have, right? And admin might be able to create a new user in the application or portal, whereas a user can only view those applications, right? So that is called authorization, right? Authorization is your ability to use all the resources that are available for you, whereas authentication is you just entered into the playing ground, you don't know what to use, what not to use, right? So I mean, this is this clear? Authentication, validates if you are a right user, whereas authorization validates if you are right user for right resource. Very, very important, right? So very, very important thing we need to understand. Now, what are the authorization can be enforced at code level, whereas authentication can be enforced in the API level itself, right? What are the authentication mechanisms that you can think of? What's the basic authentication? Yes. Basic is basic username and password, right? Straightforward. It's encoded in a base64 format, right? Yes, many people has right answers. Bearer, access token, cookie based API key, everything is correct actually. Right. One more authentication mechanism you might have missed. I'll get you remember shortly. Right. So basic authentication will have a basic username and password. Yes, what? Username and password. Generally encoded in a base64 format. And it is very, very less secured actually. Anyone who knows what basic authentication does will also know how to decode it. Right. Now, what is an bearer or auth token? Many people nowadays use this, right? There is one more authentication. Someone Dhananjay said like valid signature token. One example is JWT. Very, very famous technology in today's world. How many of you heard of this term JWT? Json Web Tokens. Yes. I'll talk about this one by one. So auth key is something like it's a random string of key. It might have information or not depending upon how you generate this key, right? And this key is provided to as an application level or as an user level also, right? What I mean by application level is, so when you are using a web application, let's say give an example. Heard of this company called MailChimp? Anyone? Yes, very, very famous company actually. So what this MailChimp company does, it does something called marketing automation. Yes, bulk email provider, right? So you can create your own email campaign and you can send to list of people that you have in your mail list, right? What this MailChimp does is, if you create an account in MailChimp, it is going to generate an API key for you, auth key for you, right? And it's given at the account level. Using this auth key, you can they'll be also providing an exposing an API to the users public, right? To create or update contact. To send an email, you need to have contact information, right? When I say contact information, email ID, username, first name, last name, and all those important things you might need, right? So there's an API that's provided by your MailChimp to create an update API. That API might look something like this: HTTPS www.us.mailchimp.com/contact/create, something like this. Now they will provide this endpoint, and they also want you to include an authentication in your header. This authentication API key is provided by, if you log into your MailChimp account, you go to settings, there's an API key area, and you can use that particular API key, copy that and put it in a Postman kind of thing, and in headers, put it there, put the auth detail there, and request body, you give this contact information like email, first name, last name, right? And you hit this API, right? Now it will give you a response whether this is successful or not, like that, right? So now this type of API key is called an account level API key, right? For entire account, this API key is common, right? Now, what is an API in this context? MailChimp is providing this, but what we call an API, we don't call this endpoint as an API or this headers as an API. We call this particular, MailChimp has given this endpoint to access the API. That's the right term to say, right? MailChimp give us this endpoint and kind of an request body format and header authorization token, so that we can access the API, right? This is not an API. This is a way of accessing an API. That's the first thing we need to understand, right? This is an example of auth token, which is generated at the org level or the account level itself. So there's an user level token also. For example, I'm a user. I wanted to access only few resources like create or update contact. There might be another user level token that's provided for me to make me use only particular set of things, right? So that's a user level token. So yeah, in a basic authentication, you have username and password, whereas auth token might be at the org level, or at the user level also. So if it's an org level, we generally call the term as a client access key. If it's a user level, we call it a user access key. Right? So that's with respect to auth token, right? And what someone was saying about this, okay, cookie based authentication is very broad. I'll cover maybe later here. I'll also cover what's a JWT actually. So Json Web Tokens, right? Actually, so there's this website called jwt.io. Anyone explore this website? So you have a JSON kind of data, 3 different data, right? Header data is there, actual payload, what you're going to send is there, and signature is there. The signature is important. The signature is an kind of an token, like let's say A, B, C, D, E, F, some random token generated. This token information will only be available from the sender end and available in the receiver end, right? So, and there is a payload data and there's a header also. Now, what's the purpose of this JWT token? If you wanted to use this data, you need to decode this particular JWT using the token, right? So without token, you cannot use this particular JWT, right? So now a sender will, what he will do, he will headers obviously will be there, and header means what type of algorithm I'm encoding this data with, and type obviously JWT, and actual data that will be available is in this payload section, and it will also encode this particular data with the signature provided by an API key, right, and send over the network. Now this JWT token is received in the receiver end. If receiver end doesn't have this API key here, signature key here, it will not able to decode the particular message. So that message becomes unavailable to them, right? So only a user with the right signature key will be able to decode this token and use this data. So this is one of the easy and secure way of sending this data over the servers with an proper authentication mechanism. And why it is much preferred, again, because of this JSON payload structure, right? You can send the entire content what you wanted to intern as an encoded format through JWT itself. Very nice way to do it. That's about JWT. It has header, body, and signature. So this body contains important information. Signature will contain the actual API key, and the header will contain the encoding algorithm. Okay, fine. Now, what is an OAuth? So have you, I mean, most of you have used this particular kind of thing, right? I mean, if you go into many applications, if you fill out some form under it, ask you to log in via Facebook, logging via Gmail, something. Have you encountered these kind of scenarios? You don't have to necessarily create a login in their particular portal. You can use your Gmail account or your Facebook account to log in into their portal. Have you encountered these kind of scenarios? Yes, obviously. At least one point of the time, everyone would have encountered this, right? So how it is actually done? See, if I am creating an application, if I want my users to log in via Facebook, what I will do, Facebook provides this API. I will have my Facebook account created for my web application, and they will provide me something called client ID and client secret. So I'm a client to them, right? For Facebook, I'm one of the client which are going to use their service for login, right? So they'll be providing me client ID and client secret and secret API key. So whenever I'm be exposing these APIs in my application for the users. So whenever a user clicks a login through Facebook, dialog box will open, right? The dialog box provided by Facebook actually, and there will be a link to this things and all. So once you give username and password, what it will ask? Facebook username and password, what it will ask? Hey, allow this particular application to use your details, username, password, and date of birth or mobile number, everything you can. If you click on allow, what will happen? That particular Facebook will verify your client ID, client secret information. If it is valid, so it will give your user information to my application, right? So without you having to give any details, I'm getting all your details from a third party through this OAuth mechanism. Very simple and convenient, right? So this is a general overview about OAuth. And I also wanted to talk about cookie-based authentication. very important in terms of API API world. So before understanding that, we also wanted to understand what's a cookie. What is a cookie? Catch, I will not say that cookie as a catch. Yes, you can say it's a small program to do certain things, right? So basically, I will say that catch is something different. I'll not say it exactly as a catch. It will be a temporary things that are stored in our browser or in the client in our computer, so that our browser can make use of this data again when you make use of this particular website again. For example, yesterday I logged into my Facebook account, right? I don't have to log in again because every time I hit this Facebook, it will directly take me to my home page. I don't have to log in again. How this is happening? How this is happening? This is happening because of cookie-based authentication, right? So every time if your application is asking me to log in, that's how irritating is that. So once I log in, right, there's a cookie information for Facebook stored in my browser. In my browser means what? In my computer. So what that information contains? Information contains a cookie token, which is a unique token for me to authorize. This is the user that is using this particular application. Karthik is the user, right? And one more thing it will contain is an expiry date. Every cookie will have an expiry date, right? I cannot leave my system logged in forever, right? So there has to be some expiry date. After that, I have to re-log in again, right? So until then, if you this cookie, if you hit this Facebook, first thing what it will do, it will take the cookie and will hit this Facebook servers with my cookie. Then the Facebook server will know, hey, this is the authenticated right user only. Karthik is only logging in. I can give the direct login things again. I don't want to make him log in my application again. That it will know, right? That's the one purpose of cookie, right? What's the other purpose of cookie? What's the other purpose of cookie that you can think of? Speed up the loading page. No, I would not say it is going to speed up the loading page. That's a work of a catch actually. There comes the catch. Yes, store user behavior, right? We all know how we are targeted daily. So if you visit some Amazon, some product, same product is going to display in the other websites also. How it is able to do that? Cookie will store all these informations for you. Cookie will store like what website this user has visited and what type of product that he is interested in, and later other websites will use this cookie information to target you. Advertisement, yes, exactly. Right? It's used to target your internet usage. Right? That's also one purpose of cookie. Right? So cookie is a small piece of storage area, a temporary storage area, just run by your browser to make use of this data. Okay, I was talking about this cookie-based authentication. How this authentication actually works? I say like I'm a logged in user, fine. How this particular server is knowing, validating this cookie so that it says I'm a logged in user? Any answers? Okay. Someone says like user login from browser generate cookie. The cookie is not generated from there, right? Cookie is actually generated from the server end, and it is set in the client end, right? Very important, because see, in our I'll show this, maybe try to just give me a minute. Just a minute. I'm trying to show you something. Hey, sorry, am I audible? My power went down suddenly. I'm connecting through my mobile now. Okay. Okay. I was searching something in my project I couldn't able to find, but I'll show the same thing here actually. So if you wanted to make use of this cookie, there is something called this add-on, and you can find in your Chrome store, this cookie add-on, right? If you click this, it will show you what are the cookies that a particular thing is using, right? Like this is our application that we are currently working on, right? If you see this, there's something called session ID, right? So session ID tells, hey, this particular session is active. I don't want to log in again like that, right? This is very, very important. We also make use of one more cookie called underscore fm underscore ct, right? So these two things are actually very, very important, at least in our application, right? So the cookies, now if you see, this cookie is actually permanently set here. So if even if I reload this application, it's not going to make me log in again. It's going to open the application for us, right? So if you see this, every cookie has an expiry date, right? So this particular cookie has an expiry date of August 1, 2022, right? Similarly, every cookie will have an expiry date. So now we are able to understand how a cookie based authentication works, right? If you understand this, there is one more thing that we need to understand. It's called stateful and stateless web servers. Now there's this authentication mechanism that is happening in the background, right? We send something and we use validation is happening. So I was talking about this particular 3-4 servers connected in together horizontally, right? We call that as an horizontal scaling. But imagine, let's say I will say what's the difference between a stateful and stateless application actually. For example, if you are logging into a particular application, that login information, first that API is going to hit in your server one, right? Someone is unmuted. Can you mute yourself, please? Okay. Let's say my first login kind of endpoint is going to hit the server one. Now, if I maintain my login information in the server one, what will happen? If I wanted to use one more feature in my application, let's say the load balance is redirecting into server 2. Server 2 will not have my login information, right? Server 2 will not know whether I'm logged in user or not. It will try to redirect me back to the login page. I mean, you're getting my point whole as such. What I'm trying to say here. So when you log in, let's say I'm logging into my Facebook application, that login kind of endpoint is going to the server one, and I'm successfully logged in. Let's say I'm going to my Facebook wall or going to some other pages that I have already liked. That request is redirected to server 2. What will happen? It will not know whether I'm logged in user or not, right? So every time, for how many servers available, I have to log in again and again, right? It's called stateful application. It's not preferred nowadays. Whereas this cookie kind of mechanism is called stateless application actually, right? So the server doesn't maintain the login state actually, right? So login state is not maintained in the server end, whereas it's maintained in the client end itself through this cookie kind of information, so that every server will read this cookie information and will know whether this particular user is logged in or not. That's the stateless architecture. Right? So all the modern applications are moving towards this stateless architecture. That's the main difference between stateful and stateless. So till now, what are the authentication mechanisms that we saw in our header section? Is that fine actually? Or any confusions in that? So can we move on to the next thing? Okay, stateful and stateless is, so I was saying, right, every authentication mechanism, if a server is maintaining that state, if it's called stateful, maintaining that state means what? Whether your server holds information, whether you are logged in user or not. If a server holds that information, what will happen? Every time if a request go to another server, you have to log in again, right? Because every server is hosted in a different machines, running in different computers. Right? So if you wanted to have your application as a stateless, you wanted to put that information either centrally or in the client end. So that's called a stateless application. Means what? Server doesn't maintain your state of your login or whether this user has logged out. It is maintained at the client end. Okay. Now comes the most important part of an API is the request body. Now what happens here? The request body. In what scenarios you need a request body actually? Yes, post call obviously, right? If you wanted to put some data into your database or you wanted to process the data inside a server, you need a request body, right? So the request body is something which is going to we send data to server for it to process or store in DB, right? In those kind of things, the request body is necessary. Either mostly in post, put, and patch call. We post the necessary information. It's a responsibility of server to parse all these informations and give it back to you. Okay. And we also need to also remove one more important components of a request and response, right? That is called status code. Very, very important. Most of the people here might be aware of this. What is the status code of an API? So if we are either getting some data from a server and we are also posting data, putting data, but we want to know whether whatever operations that we are doing is successful or not. That's an important thing. If it's successful, we'll do some set of operation. If it is not successful, we'll do other sets of operations, right? So success or failure is very, very important for us to determine whether this particular thing that we are doing in the API is working or not, right? And based on that only, we are also marking our API automation as pass or fail, right or not? So very, very important status codes are 2xs series. 200 is okay. 201 is accepted, and similarly we have other status codes, right? We are not that much worried about this informational response, but we are importantly there are 200 series, which is a success response actually, right? 200 is okay, 201 is created, 202 is accepted. So these are the things which indicates that the things that we are sending has been either processed or accepted successfully, or the data is created, everything is there. So these are the 200 series is for success. Then what is the 400 series is for? So failure, not authorizations. Failure only, but what kind of failure? That's very, very important. 200 is for success. 4xx series. Failure is fine. Yes, it's client failure. That is important term. So if someone asks what is 4xx series, it's a client failure. What's a client failure? Client is our browser, right? If we are sending wrong information or we are sending API requests without any proper auth mechanism, that means what? Server cannot process our data, which means it's not an error of a server. It's not a mistake of a server, rather. It's a mistake of us in our side to send this information properly, right? So if you see this 400 series, 400 is what? Bad request, right? The request itself is bad. And 401 is unauthorized, right? So hey, this particular user is not authorized at all to access this particular resource. It's respect to unauthorized authorization things and all, right? This thing is going to be coming in the future for payment related things, payment required and all those status. 401 again, very, very famous code. It's a forbidden. Hey, you are a valid user only, right? But I am not able to send all this information for you because you don't have a right privileges. That's called authorization again, forbidden, right? What is this not found? Very, very famous again. What are the scenarios do you think 404 error will come? Wrong endpoint, exactly. So that's a most important thing. So whenever we say give a wrong endpoint, it is going to give us a 404. Let's try to test that actually here. I'm not sure whether this particular website is configured to give an four not four exactly. Let's check. Okay, if we give wrong endpoint, it's going to take us back to the home page. They have configured like that. But generally, in general case, what happens? Maybe we'll test with our application. Yes, so it's one of the 404 things, right? We couldn't find your page, not found, right? Let's check the network activity also. Okay. Anyway, so this is one of the thing. If you give wrong endpoint, that means what? It will throw 404 or we couldn't find your resources at this time and all, right? So what is the other scenario of a 404? Wrong endpoint is one scenario. What's the other scenario? If you're searching for the wrong data, try to test this. Give me a minute. We're just returning some random data every time. Fine. Okay. I mean, this is not a maybe right website to test the 404. Maybe I'll show some other different examples. But generally, what we need to understand is like 404 is either wrong endpoint or the resource that we are searching in the particular database is not available at all. Right? Maybe this request website, I don't know whether it's giving a 404 for us to test. No, I think. Okay, fine. Yes, the recordings will be shared actually. Anyway, we'll continue. And we not know this 408 is request timeout. Before moving from this 4xx series, I also want to touch upon this 409 conflict. What is a conflict? What in what scenarios can be a conflict? Let's say you are designing a database in such a way. Let's say it's a MySQL database, and you are designing it in such a way that your particular thing is going to like, for example, it's going to be unique. Your record is going to be unique. Someone has posted this 404 endpoint. Let's. Okay, great. Thank you, Satyanand. Actually, right. This is an example of 404. This is a wrong endpoint which is not even available, right? So 404. So let's say you coming back to this 409, right? Let's say you have a database table with ID and email and first name and last name and all, right? What if you can enforce an unique constraint here? An email ID can be unique, like that you can enforce a constraint, right? Right or not? So if you try to insert another record, let's say I'm having this record 1 with email ID test at test.com something, first name is first name, last name is something, right? So if I try to insert one more record with the same email ID, what will happen? It's going to throw me an error, right? It's a database conflict actually, right? Because the email has to be unique, but it is not unique in this case, so it is going to throw an error. In those kind of scenarios, you can return a 409 conflict. It will know, it knows like there's some conflict with the data that you are trying to process. It's one of an example, right? Fine. So this is about 400 series. What about 500 series? What error is that? 400 is client error, 500 is server side error, right? You are sending the data properly. What if server is not able to process the data? What is this internal server error? Very, very irritating error. I hope at least one time on many of you might have encountered this. Too much traffic, I will not say too much traffic is 500 error. It will say unavailable, system is unavailable. Yeah, it might be due to wrong input data. That is one of the possibilities, right? Your input data will be correct, but there might be some wrong data. Let's say you are sending some null data over your client and some null pointer exception happens in the background, right? It might be, and it might cause internal server error, right? We might not know until we go and check the logs. I mean, everyone is aware of what's a null pointer exception here, right? Nothing new, I guess. What's a null pointer exception? So if you try to process any data over a null object, it will throw a null pointer exception, right? Yes. So if you try to process a null value, it will throw a null pointer exception. At least in Java, it throws, right? So now, what's the bad gateway and service unavailable? What's a bad gateway first? So bad gateway occurs when a server is busy actually. Let's say server is rebooting and currently it's not able to process any request, right? In those kind of scenarios, it's a bad gateway. And yes, server is not responding. Yes. So in that case, you will see a gateway timeout actually. If a server is taking too long time to respond, then it's a 504 error. It's a gateway timeout, right? So we need to understand any request will have a particular timeout. They might have configured, the developers who develop this application will configure this application with a timeout, because a request is coming and it cannot keep on loading and keep on loading until some point it has to be stopped, saying some error response has to be thrown, whether the timeout error or data is not available. Some error has to be thrown if the data is not processed. So in those kind of scenarios, this timeout is thrown, gateway timeout. Service unavailable is what if a server is down, totally down. It is not able to process any data at all. It's a service unavailable thing, right? So these are generally about status codes. And 3x status code sometimes it is used. I'll try to show an example. I show this example of let's try to check if it's still valid. Yes. So if you see this when I hit 7.com, it's trying to redirect me to geo7.com. What is the status code here? 301 moved permanently, right? So what's the 301? Moved permanently, right? So what does it mean? The 7.com endpoint is moved permanently to geo7.com. It's a redirect. Okay? So these type of redirections are actually configured in the load balancer level itself. Okay, someone says cache data is reloaded by API. Also, it shows 3x's. Yes, okay, that is also right. So generally, this kind of redirections happens at the load balancer level itself, right? It will not go to the server, application server. Load balancer, there will be some rules configured in the load balancer where this kind of endpoint comes. You can redirect to this particular endpoint like that. If you don't have an AWS account, please go ahead and create an AWS account for one, and you can explore these options. Actually, there's something called elastic load balancer. Maybe I'll try to show that. You can configure all these rules actually. It's an AWS console actually, right? If we go to this load balancer section, you can see some load balancers configured here actually, right? So if you go to this, if you see here, I was talking about an HTTP and HTTPS yesterday actually. So all the HTTP request is going to come to this 80 port of this load balancer, or at least redirect to this 80 port of load balancer, and all the HTTP is going to come to this 443 port. I can add or edit rules here actually. See if what is this rule? Forward to a particular proxy server. That's the rule here actually. You can even I can create my own rule here. If I create an insert rule here, add a condition, I can see what option it is showing. What is the host header? What is the path? What's the HTTP header? It is right. So let's say if my path is slash API slash users, giving a rough example. What action I'm going to do? I can redirect it to some other thing, right? I can read 443 port, and I can say permanently move, right? 443 to port of a particular EC2 instance that it is forwarding to, right? That's important. It's not redirect, it is not going to redirect to any random server. It's going to redirect to particular EC2 instance or a target group that you have configured in the load balancer. Where you have configured all those things is here actually. Load balancer. What this is the VPC means the internal network that this load balancer machine is currently available in, right? And just 1 minute. So it is going to forward to this bundle sign up proxy servers actually, right? Bundle proxy servers target groups. See, this target groups is a group of EC2 instance. EC2 instance is a machine, computer machine or server that we can create in the particular AWS, right? And it's going to redirect all the incoming requests from the load balance is going to be redirected into this bundle proxy target group load balance machine, HTTP machine, right? That's the meaning of this. AWS is very, very interesting and highly efficient cloud solution. Please, like if you haven't explored AWS, please go ahead and do that. First thing what you can do is you can create an Ec2 instance. If you go to this Ec2 is nothing but a server computer that you can purchase inside your AWS. So there are 39 applications, 39 servers that are running for different purposes. These are 39 different computers with different configurations actually, right? Okay. How much of AWS learning is required? See, what I'm trying to give you is an additional information. This AWS kind of things is kind of an additional data that you will require. You will require if you are have to move up towards your career path and all. And people nowadays for testing, they are expecting something like an SDate profile actually, right? People, even testers, they expect, even big companies actually wanted to know, wanted the candidates know about everything. So it's always good for a QA to explore this AWS kind of thing. You can go for this DevOps and those kind of areas. It's very, very crucial because you get to know what is happening in the background. Simply we are testing in the UI at the API level, but what actually happening in the backend is something testers might not be aware of. If you are aware of those flows and context, then your career path will be very, very good actually. Even for a proper DevOps engineer or SDET engineers, big product-based companies are ready to offer packages like anything nowadays, right? Even for 4 years, 5 years experience, people get 30 to 40 LPA in India nowadays. Service-based company is a different scenario. They're not like quite tech savvy, and they don't the QAs in service-based companies don't always get the opportunities to explore the code base or libraries from developers and backend systems and all those things. But it is, if you learn all these side things, like what is an AWS, what's a Docker, Kubernetes, and what is an application server, how it is actually installed and configured, what's the database, SQL, NoSQL databases, it is very, very helpful. You can even create small applications for your testing projects, and even you can create small scripts to automate small things using shell scripting or and all those things, right? Very, very useful and helpful actually. Okay. I'm not Rahul, I'm actually Karthik, right? I'm coming in Rahul's account for you to anyway. No, not a problem. This is it. So we'll see a basic example with respect to what we saw until now. See, we are hitting this okay. Let's take the same example actually. So here what I'm requesting, request is the domain, I'm API user system endpoint, and 2 is the, okay, what is this 2 actually? I can put 1 here, I can put 2 here. Okay. Path param, yes. So this is one other way of filtering out your data, right? What is the endpoint? I want the users, but what user detail I want? I want the user detail with an ID of 2. So same thing you can do in the Postman actually. Instead of users, if you say /2, what's going to do? It's going to return the data in the Postman console also, right? Now what we'll do, we'll try to do a small exercise how we can do the same thing over an rest assured framework. Actually. We'll create one project. Let it be a Maven project. How many of you have worked in Maven projects? So what is a Maven? Please, if you haven't worked with Maven, please don't create a generic Java project and add your jars manually. It's a very, very wrong practice to do. Nobody does that actually. Please use Maven or Gradle kind of package managers, which I rightly said. It's a package manager for Java. Not only package manager, it's more than that. I'll talk about this in some time. But let's say for a simplicity, let's call it as a package manager, right? And please go ahead and create a Maven project. Yes, a build tool actually. That's the right answer. So arch type is a template. It's a Maven template that you wanted to create. Just go with the default template, whatever Eclipse is giving for currently. Let's say in the group ID as Chris test. Clicking on finish. Going to create and posting all these data actually. Going to create a Maven project like this. So it's going to create some packages defaultly for us, right? SRC main Java, SRC test Java, and there are some Maven dependencies. Right now we didn't have any Maven dependencies now. That's fine. Let's check whether there are right Java versions. So I don't want to use Java 5. I wanted to, let's go with Java 8. And even compiler, fine. So here comes the pom.xml. So if you haven't installed Java or something, please go ahead and install Java 8, not latest versions of Java. Java 11 is fine, but still I would prefer Java 8 actually. It's most used and most stable version actually, currently for use. Right? Java 16 is currently there, which is a temporary version, and Java 17, which is long time support version, LTS version, is going to come very soon. But currently Java 11 is a LTS version. Maybe you can use Java 11 or Java 8, but I would prefer Java 8 actually. Right? From Java 11, it's kind of a very different scenario totally, right? From Oracle has commercialized use of Java, so there is an open JDK, and there are different flavors of JDK from different organizations. Right? Even Amazon has its own Java distribution called Corretto. If you're not available, if you're not aware of that, there is something called let's check. Okay, I'll just show this. So it's an AWS way of distributing in OpenJDK, right? So Amazon Corretto is an OpenJDK it's provided by AWS. You don't need to create an Amazon account, just create an AWS account actually. Okay, anyway. So here I should, this dependency section is where you give the library dependencies actually. Right. So if you wanted to add some library, or you want to make use of some Java libraries, you go to this Maven Central in the internet, find the right packages, and add it into your dependency section. If you go to this pom.xml, there's XML namespace actually, right? So we are saying we are using Maven Apache, this particular pom this version, and these are the XML schema instances. Right? And this basic data is necessary for the Maven to process our project, and we have group ID and artifact ID. Have you seen this group ID and artifact ID version some elsewhere? Where you might have seen this group ID, artifact ID? It is in the Maven Central, right, for different libraries. So even you can, if it's your own project, you can even package this as an entire jar and put it into a Maven Central. That is also possible, right? Every package will have group ID, artifact ID version, and what type of packaging it might have. There are two types of packaging mainly: jar packaging or var packaging. I'll talk about this packaging a little later. Var is web archive, Java is Java archive packaging, right? So now I wanted to use rest assured in my particular Maven project. So what I'll say rest assured Maven dependency. It is going to take me a Maven central repository. Maybe I'll try to make use of this. Let's go with this most used version 298. Copy to the clipboard. I can paste it in the dependency section here. Right. Maybe I'll try to, not necessary, but generally I'll keep this JSON path also. Try to make use of this itself. Let's try to maintain the consistency and uniformity of the versions across different packages in the same library thing, right? So once you click save, it's going to have all these dependencies for you. I'll remove the scope called test. We don't need test scope. We need a compile scope or runtime scope. I'll remove this and I'll save. So all these libraries available for us in the compile time itself. Scope is like where you wanted to have this particular dependencies, whether it's a test time or runtime or the compile time, right? So if it's runtime, these libraries are going to be available once you start to execute all these data. If test time, once you run this JUnit test and all those kind of time only it's going to be available. It's not going to be available in the compile time. So scope is basically definition of in which part the particular thing has to be available, in what scenario the dependency has to be available, right? Just a minute. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and do a basic whatever example we saw in this request example, right? We'll try to use the same thing here, try to see what happens. I'll go to this app.java. So I'll remove this system.out.println. I mean, how many of you are not aware of basics of Java? Or, I need to go in depth actually. Basics of Java, is anyone needs that? My question is like someone totally new to Java. That's my question. Okay. Okay, I'll try to touch upon some basics. You have this class kind. Java is a true object-oriented programming language, right? You have classes everywhere. Anything, if you wanted to add any methods you wanted, it has to be inside a class. So you create this main method so that every main method is the starting point of any Java execution, right? And inside main method, whatever you put, if you click on run as Java application, it's going to execute for you. Right? We'll touch upon small Java concepts as we travel through our course. So there's something called base URI, which you can give. So I'm going to give the base URI as https request.in. Right. So this is the base URI that you are giving here. Right. The base URI is like this is the domain or endpoint, and not endpoint actually. It's a base uniform source identifier. After which I'm going to continue all the execution, all the rest of the endpoints. Like that, I'm saying it. So this is the base URI, and there's a class called rest assured, which is coming from this rest assured package or library, from which I am making use of the static variable called base URI. I am declaring this as static because of that one I am directly able to access this variable from my class. Otherwise, I have to create an object and access this variable. I hope that much is clear actually. Otherwise, this is not available everywhere, right? So there's something called a request specification. So when I say rest assured given, what it will do, it will we have whatever the information that we have configured inside this rest assured is going to be mapped into this request specification object, right? What is mapped in this context? Only the base URI is mapped. There may be additional details that you can pass into this rest assured. I'll talk about that later in the later sessions. But understand that this base URI is only detail that we are currently configured in the rest assured class. This particular base URI is now available in the request specification, right? Now, I mean, again, the request specification interface, right? For people who doesn't know what's an interface is a kind of an mechanism where you declare only the methods and its implementation is going to be given by the implementing class, right? It's a right way of doing things actually. In that sense, you don't want to miss any methods for implementation and all. If you enforce it into an interface, an implementing class definitely have to implement that methods in that interface, right? Now there's one more object called class called response, or interface called response. You can say rest assured. So here I can say what request dot given dot get. In the get, I can pass the rest of the endpoint actually, right? Here I'll pass this. So why I'm not passing this rest of the endpoint here is it's not a right practice to do that, because whatever response I'm targeting here is only for API users too, not any other thing. So it's always a good practice to give the base URI here and rest of the endpoints as and when on the go, depending upon your needs. Right? I've hard coded this. Generally, it's not a good practice to hard code this. You have to have this in a separate like variable or something, placeholder at the class level. But anyway, we are just worried about the logic here. We'll check this. So now the response will come. Maybe I'll try to print the response. I'll tend to print the response as string. So I'll say response dot as string. Let's try to run this and check if it is working. It is working, right? So response is coming data ID to email, first name, last name, and the related data. Right? Whatever we see in this Postman, right? Whatever we see here or whatever we see in the browser, the same thing is coming via an app library or Java library. So what is the thing we need to understand? All the things are the same, right? Whatever we try to do in the browser, whatever we try to do in the Postman, whatever we try to do in this particular piece of code, everything is the same. It just basically one operation. Hit this endpoint, get the response, and do whatever you want to do with that. Just that the type of interface is different. In the interface is the browser, in the is the browser. Interface is in the Postman is this UI that we see here. Interface in this particular application is the console, right? The way through which we are interfering or representing the particular data is the only difference. Otherwise, the implementation logic is the same. Okay? Even browser and Postman, what it is doing in the backdrop, even it has some piece of code, just that it's presented neatly in the UI. Whatever data that we are giving here, what it is doing is taking the data and putting it into a code, and it's going to run that code only and get the data and display it in the neat format for that. Everything is taken care by the code. Just that in the rest assured, what we are doing, we are directly using the code to achieve whatever we want instead of fancy UIs like browser and Postman. Right. So now, where does an API testing like Postman or REST assured comes into picture? Leave aside a browser. Let's compare a Postman REST assured. Why there are two separate things if we can do all the things in one or the other? Why does it even come into picture? You can do some basic level of automation in your Postman tool itself. I hope you are aware of. Okay, we are going to anyway see that what it is. There is something called Postman Scripts that you can execute actually, right? Each and every Postman will have a script associated to it. You can execute that. See, there are some test results associated with this, right? There's some script that is running in the background. We'll talk about more on this later, but generally, why we need a REST assured library if we have Postman? So if you have if you're writing code to all these things, you have a much greater control than what you get in Postman or in your browser, right? Browser is the least, the most controlled environment, whereas Postman is we are able to do more than the browser, little more than the browser. Many things are there. Again, it's a feature limited, whereas Postman is now a $1 billion company. I think. How many of you have heard of Postman generate so many funding? It's now super huge actually. It started as just an Chrome extension, right? Now it's actually a $1 billion company, and it's very, very helpful tool actually, right? So why we need a REST assured? It gives much more control over what we want. That's one thing. Any other answers? Yes, framework, obviously. So we can integrate many things with our REST assured, right? Whereas integration is kind of strictly limited in the Postman. I can integrate whatever reporting framework I want. I can put in whatever way I want. I can send and test a email as a report through my Postman. REST assured Java codes. I can integrate CI/CD everything here through Java codes. I can make this Java run in any environment, any servers. How flexible is that? So only we need REST assured kind of framework, right? So as an API tester, there are a few things, at least I think, which is very, very important. Actually, I thought of talking about the REST assured architecture in this today's session, but I'm afraid like time is not going to be sufficient. But maybe I'll show one thing before maybe signing off today. I was talking about servers, and the code that is used to run the server actually, right? I'll show the actual code. If you are interested in development, we have one more course also. I'll be the trainer for that as well. Right? I'll show the actual controller itself. Whatever you see in this project is actually a development code, a server code that is written to process your request actually. For example, let's take this. Before that, okay, I was talking about some entry point inside our every entry point that a request is coming from the client is going to be a controller, right? That controller class is actually this. I'll show like how it works, and maybe we'll talk about what it is actually doing. Just a minute. Okay. See, here the server is actually my own local machine, right? Now the local machine, what is the local host? It's 127.0.0.1. Even if I give that, it's going to be same. One minute. Even if I give the same, is going to be the output, right? So local host means what? My own machine, which has this IP address 127.0.0.1, and which is running in the port 8080, right? My application server is running in the port 8080. Now, what is the endpoint here? Can anyone say? It is actual server running the backdrop in my machine. But only difference is instead of running in the remote in another computer, it's actually running in my own machine. That's the only difference, right? What's the endpoint here? /hello/world, right? So if you give this endpoint, this is a get method, obviously, right? If you give this endpoint, I have configured my server to return this output, hello world second method, right? Where is this particular thing I have configured? In the controller class. If you see here, this is the controller class /hello is endpoint, and if I append /world, I'm saying return hello world second method, right? This is going to be returned. This is the controller class. Don't worry about what actually doing here. It's actually there are few annotations to take care of certain things. If you give REST controller, it will act as a controller class. And if you see the request mapping is the kind of HTTP method that we are actually talking about, right? So here /hello is the common endpoint for all the methods here. If I use this annotation called at get mapping, it's going to process only get method. Whatever browser I hit here is a get method actually, right? So /world endpoint I'm giving, it's actually get endpoint, get method. What's endpoint? /hello/world with a get method HTTP request. So everything is kind of parsed in the controller. What it's returning? It's returning the string hello world second method, right? Same thing I can test with the Postman also, right? If I in the Postman, let's say I'm having this get request localhost 8080, and here I'm saying hello world. I'm hitting the send, showing the same, right? Hello world second method, right? Everything is the same. So this is the actual server code that is actually doing the work for us, right? In the background, it is not simple. This is a very, very basic example of how a server will work. It's much more complicated than that. So this is what actually happening in the backdrop, right? Just for the sake of understanding, giving this example, right? So if you understand what is happening here, creating a basic server like this is very, very simple, right? I'm using a library called Spring here, right? Spring, which is a Java library to create a Java server, which can be run. So it can be a Node.js, it can be a Ruby on Rails, it can be Python, Django. For me, Java is compatible language, so I'm using this. Anyway, that is, we are going to see rest assured is actually library from Java actually, right? If you go to this Ruby, it might have different library. If you go to Python, it might have different library, right? I think Ruby has this library called HTTP party, I guess, and you have this assertions, right? RSpec and all those things. So rest assured is kind of a Java library to achieve this. Right? Java is the most used programming language, at least in automation world, right? So because of that, we are trying to use Java. So why I'm emphasizing on this point? See, for this course scope, this is not in scope, right? We are not worried about what is happening in the server end and all. But once you understand this, maybe I'll try to touch upon little things in the server throughout the course. But once you understand this, doing an API is a very, very easy, breezy task. That's the only thing. So I will end my session with this, and we'll talk more about the upcoming syllabus that we talked later. Actually, right? This will be syllabus that we will be covering, right? The entire REST framework and Postman and the collections. Yes, we'll be sharing the code also going forward. And Newman and rest assured, everything will be going to see in the coming weeks. And your classes will be in the similar time over Saturday and Sunday in the weekends, 10 to 12 in the morning. I mean, previous batch code, the details is available with Rahul. You can contact him, and the current batch code I'll be uploading as and when we complete that particular week. Yes, we'll be doing. I don't know, like what you're talking about live projects. Understanding the concept is very. What do you think is going to be a live project actually, right? Actually, any website is actually giving us project to test all these APIs and all. There are some websites which we will be exploring in the coming weeks so that we can understand all the concepts of what is an API automation, all those things. Based on that, we'll create some framework, and using that knowledge, you'll be able to implement all those things in your live projects. That's the way that I see it. I mean, the fee detail, everything you can talk with Rahul. I'm not a right person to comment on that. Right. So, with respect to course content or the thing that we saw here, or anything with respect to your career or kind of thing that you wanted to understand in automation or Java and Selenium or REST assured, anything technically, I'm more than happy to help. So, any other questions for the today's session actually? Okay, I think we have a WhatsApp group. I'll post my LinkedIn profile also here. You can touch base with me, and there's also WhatsApp group. You can bring me in WhatsApp also, right? I'll post my LinkedIn profile here. Maybe you can give a connection request, and we'll touch base there also. Yes, we'll be explaining all those things. No problem. So whatever important things or crucial things or basic things that you wanted to explore in everything with respect to API, we'll do that. WhatsApp group link, I think the group is already created. You can ping that information with Rahul for that actually. Any other thing that we wanted to discuss today? I hope the last 2 days were super helpful for you people. Like, at least I'm able to be of some help on implanting some knowledge, right? So please share any feedback as well, like with respect to my teaching style and any other course contents that I wanted to cover. More than happy to be receiving that. The link for recording is again with Rahul. You can contact me. Fine. If nothing is there, can we close the session for today? Yes, we will be talking all about the project examples and all those things. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope to see you all people in our upcoming API sessions in upcoming weeks. Right. Thank you everyone.